Good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to another episode of Crewzin to the Void. I'm your host, Fish, and today we're going to be unleashing Mythical Mutts. And we're going to go over the backstory of how different dog breeds were bred for us, and we're talking warrior dogs, pirate dogs, and even the ones that guided our souls to the afterlife. So, buckle up and enjoy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we are going to start in Africa, and we're going to go to ancient Egypt with the Salukis. Saluki is one of the oldest known, I'd say, bred dogs. There are definitely dogs throughout history that were in town, or that we know about, but these ones were specifically bred, and they clock back to about 5,000 years old. Now, these dogs were generally only held by kings and queens and higher noblemen of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. And one of the cool things about these dogs is they were actually mummified with their owners when they died. So we know that a lot of Egyptian pharaohs, once they died, they would become mummified. Well, with that, they would also be given all of their belongings and things that people wanted them to take with them to the afterlife. One of their things that they got mummified with them was their dogs. And that's kind of cool. Not in the idea that we're wrapping up dogs in cloth towels, but the idea that, like, hey, your dog meant a lot to you, and obviously you two need to be together in the afterlife. Like, that's a cool idea and thought process. Now, going into it even further, some scholars believe that Salukis were the living representation of Anubis. So if you don't know who Anubis is the Egyptian god of death, kind of. He protects the souls in the afterlife and judges where you're going to go in the afterlife, where you're going to sit in the caste system of the afterlife. And he's known as the guardian of the tombs, the pyramids of the ancient world. So Anubis is not really the god of death, more of like the protector of the afterlife, because he is a very, unlike Hades. Hades was the Greek god of death. Hades was very maliceful. Anubis has a very calm heart and very caring heart. He sees himself more as a guide in the afterlife as opposed to a ruler of the underworld. And you have to kind of understand that mindset a little bit more when you think about how people believe these are the living aspects of that. So this is the person that's going to guide me through this life and is going to protect me through this life. Like, that's a really cool idea, mindset, an idea in how they looked at dogs. And that coupled with like this sleek looking, elegant, muscular, athletic dog, like, that's pretty cool, putting that all together. A few things we need to include in all of this. Specifically, what did Salukis do? They were hunting dogs, and they were sight hunting dogs. So the way that they hunted was they would find an animal and point and drive you in the right direction. They didn't necessarily go chase them down the same way that beagles would hunt down foxes. So they would just kind of guide you and point you in the right direction through their sight. So a combination of sight and smell, they would be able to point you to where different animals are. And so that's kind of how their background came about. So one thing that you're going to see a trend in is a lot of these dogs were bred for hunting, but they all had very different features, which was the really cool part and aspect of kind of their different breeds. A few more things on the Salukis is Yeah, that's it. All right, next up, we're going to go very close to the Saluki. We're going to go to Greyhounds. Greyhounds were another very old dog race that transcends eras, dynasties, you would say. These dogs were prized in ancient Egypt, Persia, Rome, and Greece. And you can even find actual references of these dogs throughout history. So if you look back into the Odyssey, Argos is Odysseus's dog, who was specifically a greyhound. And one of the really cool things is, after Odysseus was gone for 20 years, when he came back into the house before he shot the arrow through the axes, he came back into the house, and the only one that recognized him was Argos, his dog. So if you remember that scene entirely, like, that's really, really cool. That was specifically a greyhound. So if you think back to kind of this idea of the protector, the one that's going to shuttle you through this current life, your protector recognized you from a mile away and said, "Come home, buddy." Like, that's cool. And it's almost poetic. I mean, it is poetic. It's a poetic Edda. So with that, that's the kind of loyalty that it is through these dogs. But let's talk more about how the Greyhound evolved. So the Greyhound was more selective breeding than the Saluki. They were, again, used for noblemen as sight hunting dogs throughout Europe. But specifically in Greece and Rome, they were used as racing dogs. And so they would just race each other from end to end. They would have a pole. I mean, just think modern dog racing, except for back then, and everybody was in a loincloth. Very selective breeding throughout Greece and France. And that's when they really started to turn into the modern greyhound that we see. They were crossbred with Salukis through some of them, and then other different breeds as well. Now, you can also find them spread out into the Middle East as well, as the Romans carried them out throughout their travels out there. So cool little histories on those two. Now, let's go to England for a little bit, because we have some fun stories of dogs that came out of England. Specifically, let's talk about bulldogs. Bulldogs, as we know them today, are these kind of fat, fluffy little... Well, that used to be all muscle, pure muscle, because they were originally bred for a game called bull baiting. And bull baiting was when you put a giant post in the ground, tie a bull up to it, and give it some rope about 20, 30 yards. And then you would release 3 to 5 dogs. And they would bite onto the bull. And obviously, in the grand scheme, this isn't going to kill the bull. It's going to hurt it, but that's the blood sport, right? Each of these dogs would bite onto the bull, and the bull would start bucking and flapping around, and they would see which dog could hold on the longest, and everybody would bet on it and see what happened. So if you actually look back into some of the art from the time, this even actually carried over into some of the colonies in the US. You're going to see pictures of, or images of this, and just dogs getting yeeted across the sky, and it's hilarious. So, bull baiting was one of the older versions of bulldogs. And so basically, once I got banned out, these big, giant, muscular dogs weren't bred for hunting. They had their very short snouts. And essentially, with those short snouts, they could bite onto the bull and still breathe. But obviously, that doesn't give them the same hunting nose like a bloodhound would have. So that coupled with they can't see very well, they're very short, they really just kind of turned into the modern day bulldog that we know because of that, because they didn't have an outlet for all those muscular outputs that they had. Because you have to remember, they were bred to fight bulls. Like, that's wild. Imagine how muscular and jacked. Like, we all know that dude that runs around that's like 5'5" and probably close to 180 pounds. That's what a bulldog is, right? Like, he's not going to be the greatest sprinter. He's not going to be the greatest long distance effort guy. He doesn't have many, he's just, he is what he is. And that's something obviously great for like wrestlers because they can just get low and grab and hold on. But when wrestlers don't have an outlet, they got to find a different thing to try to excel at, and it changes their entire body shape. So in the gladiatorial realm, we're going to stay with that and also talk about terriers. Now, terriers did another blood sport called rat baiting. So what would happen is they would have a small enclosed area. They would have the terrier in the little area, and then they would release a certain number of rats, however many they had lying around. And then they would bet on how long it would take the dog to tear up the rats. Or another version is they would let 2 or 3 different terriers in there, let up a bunch of rats, and they would count how many rats that each terrier killed. And so with that, hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is Fish. Just wanted to take a quick time out in the action and let you know, click that like button, subscribe. It really helps us out. All right, let's get back into it. Terriers were like truly bred as scrappy little warriors, and specifically like rat kings, as you would. So they had a lot of tenacity, they had a lot of aggression, and you have to remember, they would do these all day long. So they could go over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And the other thing is they had a crazy high pain tolerance, because you have to remember, these are rats that they're fighting, and multiple, not like one at a time, like 5. So if you grab one, the rest of the pack is going to start ripping at your ankles and trying to bite you to get rid of their homie. So these things could just sit there and just bite through anything. So it was wild to see how these things got bred into the little savages that we have today of terriers. And that's why they're also known to have that crazy high aggression, because it was bred into them to go and just chase down rats all day. So as they came to America, what happened is they got bred out a little bit more a lot more for farms. So we used them a lot more to take care of the rodents around the farms. So that's how you wouldn't have snakes, you wouldn't have rats, mice, so on and so forth. You would get yourself just 2 little terriers and let them run around the farm, and they would take care of all that stuff for you. They'd be well fed, because there's rats everywhere, there's mice everywhere. You could find a snake in any bush, and now they've gotten crossbred into a lot of different things because they have such great energy and tenacity, and are also very smart animals. That's one thing you have to keep in mind about the terriers as well, is with all of this over time, they learned how to hunt from themselves. So if you don't have an outlet for that mentality, as in training them, they're going to get very aggressive very quickly, or even letting them run around at a park and chase different things. So yeah, terriers also have a pretty cool background, but like they were basically the Roombas back in the day. It's a good way to remember them. Okay. We're going to take this on over into the New World. All right. So in Newfoundland, we're going to talk about the Labrador Retriever. These, again, were bred to be hunting dogs, but specifically fishing dogs. So you would be fishing out, yada, yada, dog goes out and gets the fish. The dog would go on the boats and actually help pull nets and dive in cold waters to get buoys and pull it into the... all right, so let me set you the scene. All right. We're out rowing. We're getting our fish. And remember, this is northeast Canada, right? So we're out in the morning fishing. It's probably 50 degrees out, maybe 40, right? And the water's super cold. So we're rowing, and say I can't get to a buoy for whatever reason. I can't pull it up. I didn't have a hook or something. The dog would jump out. I'd say, hey, Lassie, go get it. And she would jump out in that cold water, go swim out, grab the buoy, come back in, pull it up to me, and then I would start pulling it out, and we would work together to get it out of the boat. And then I would trade a fish, and then she just does the shakes, and we're good. And that's how we moved on. And so that was pretty cool about the Labrador Retriever, that they were used for fish and also duck hunting. They were used for a lot. So anytime you wanted to just go get the duck in the water, you would use your Labrador to go get them. So that they had a pretty cool uprising. Now, let's talk about another cool aquatic species that a lot of people don't pay attention to all the time. And that is the Portuguese Water Dog. Now, we've had desert ghosts. We've had rat assassins up into this date. But we haven't talked about the open seas, right? We've talked about the Labradors who stayed close waters, but out in the ocean, there were the Portuguese Water Dogs. The Portuguese Water Dogs were the pirate Swiss Army knife of the canine world. So, run this back a little bit. In the Portuguese Navy, so their armada, they started to breed the Portuguese Water Dog. And they would live on ships. So with that, they would stay on the ship. They would hunt all the mice that are on the ship or rats that may have gotten on whenever they come ashore. Then when they would go ashore, the Portuguese Water Dog would swim in the water with them and then go hunting while they were out there. So in all of that, with a vast diverse of hunting, it could chase down, it could sight hunt, it could do almost anything that you needed it to do. And the reason for that is because there were two great things about the Portuguese Water Dog that make it really stand out. It's got webbed feet, so they're built for swimming. They love the water because they are truly built for it, unlike other dogs. Then they also, part of their coat, the way their thick coat is designed, is they're water resistant. They can come out of the water, shake it off, and they're dry immediately. So everyone loved it. Now, as the Portuguese Armada started to work their way into the New World, the Portuguese Water Dogs came with them, and they were actually bred into pirates at that point. So the pirates in the Caribbean and all up and down Florida and whatnot started to pick up the Portuguese Water Dogs through trade, or, hey, we're going to raid your ship, yada, yada. And, they're through the various ways that you do. And the Portuguese Water Dogs basically bred their way throughout pirates. So most ships you would find, at least at the higher level, would have 2 to 4 dogs on their ship of Portuguese Water Dogs that lived with them. And their stamina, they never stopped, right? Like, that was the other cool thing about them. They can swim for miles. They can run for miles. So, like, Portuguese Water Dogs are the Navy SEALs of dogs. Like, that's the best way to put it. Like, they're the guys you call when you need it done. But they will do everything 9 out of 10. Everything. Any dog that you could pick will excel at maybe one thing over the Portuguese Water Dog. But its foundational floor of life is so high. They were insane. Some of them were bred to fight, and they would fight on the ships with them. Some of them were bred simply to just keep ships clean and whatnot. Others were designed for hunting. And it was so cool. Now, here's the other part. They made their way all the way to the White House. Obama had 2 Portuguese Water Dogs. So, with that, I mean, they've lived a pretty cool lifestyle and had one of the more awesome arcs, I would say. All right. One last dog we're going to close this one up with is going to be poodles. These were the dogs of the Renaissance, all right? A lot of people think poodles started in Paris. They actually did not. They started in Germany. And they were for duck hunting dogs. That's essentially what they were. They went into the very cold waters of Germany, because in the same idea that you use Labrador retrievers and Portuguese water dogs with their thick coats, you would use a poodle because it's got its big thick coat, and then it would go and come back. And everybody who owns a poodle knows this, because if you have any sort of poodle in that dog, it will play fetch for hours and does not care. That's its sole job. Then they went to Paris and basically kind of became the toy dog that we have now today. And they would do different jobs throughout, because the cool thing about poodles is they're very, very smart and very strong in all aspects of their life, very similar to a Portuguese water dog. They're kind of Swiss Army knives of the dog world. They're a little bit lower than the Portuguese water dog in their floor in everything, but I'd say for the most part, they're sitting around a 6 or a 7 for most things. So they kind of just acquired different jobs throughout France and Europe. The smaller toy sizes obviously became either farm hunters around, or just held as toy dogs to collect. The bigger ones were used for different types of hunting. And also they got bred into truffle hunters as well, because they had very good sniffing capabilities. So they went from duck assassins to truffle hunters to arm candy. So poodles have lived kind of a wild lifestyle coming back too. So for all of you, next time you go to the dog park, or you're tossing a poodle a treat, or walking a bulldog past the ice cream shop, remember that these pups have royal bloodlines. They all have battle scars and even mythical resumes. So what you see is Beavis just over there chasing a ball. They were held very highly in a lot of old systems. And whether we're hunting ducks, sailing with pirate ships, guiding souls through the underworld, they've always been more than just pets. They're partners in most of the human story. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for cruising with us this week. We're excited to have you, and tune in next week.